The night does not begin with an explosion. It begins with a sound every family in Israel has learned to fear, the siren. It cuts through sleep, through conversation, through the illusion that the walls around you are enough. In Tel Aviv, people run before they are fully awake. Parents grab children, elderly residents stumble toward shelters, phones light up with warnings, and then, before the city can catch its breath, the sky starts answering with fire. Iranian missiles strike central Israel, and this time the fear is not about what might happen. It is about what is already happening. Smoke rises over the Tel Aviv area. Rescue teams race into damaged neighborhoods. Cars burn on the street. Windows are blown out. Apartment blocks are scarred. And for the people living through it, the terrifying question is no longer whether the missiles are coming. It is whether the next one will get through too. That is what makes this moment so shocking. For years, Israel's air defense systems have been presented as some of the most advanced in the world, layered, battle-tested, and capable of stopping the worst before it reaches the heart of the city. Yet the images now coming out of central Israel tell a more frightening story. The systems are intercepting many incoming threats, but not all of them. Reuters reported that the Israeli military said Iranian missiles hit central Israel on March 3rd, including the Tel Aviv area, while the ambulance service said at least some people were injured. The Associated Press had already reported days earlier that a woman in the Tel Aviv area died after being wounded in an Iranian missile attack, the first death in Israel announced since the exchange began. In other words, the shield is still there, but it is no longer a promise of total safety. And once that realization sets in, everything changes. War stops being a story about generals, missile ranges, and official statements. It becomes a story about seconds. The seconds between the alarm and the impact. The seconds spent dragging a child down a stairwell. The seconds a caregiver loses while trying to help someone else reach shelter. Haaretz and other reports described one of the most haunting details from the early strikes. A Filipina caregiver was killed after a missile or shrapnel struck near where she was helping her employer, underlining just how personal this war has become for civilians caught in its path. In Beit Shemesh, another Iranian strike killed 9 people and destroyed a synagogue built over a shelter, turning a place of prayer and refuge into a site of mourning. These are not battlefield targets in any ordinary sense. These are civilian spaces, ordinary lives, interrupted by extraordinary violence. Now, if you want to understand why this story matters so much tonight, you have to zoom out. These missile strikes are not isolated. They are part of a rapidly widening war involving Iran, Israel, and the United States. AP reported that by March 4th, hundreds had been killed in Iran, including children, while at least 11 people had been killed in Israel. Reuters reported that U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said operations against Iran would not become an endless war, but he also described the campaign as surgical and unapologetic. That tells you 2 things at once. First, this conflict is already far beyond a symbolic exchange. And second, none of the major players is speaking like it expects the violence to stop immediately. Iran, for its part, is framing the confrontation as self-defense and retaliation, not escalation for its own sake. Iranian officials have told the United Nations they will continue exercising what they call their lawful right of self-defense until the attacks against them cease. Tehran's message is that it did not choose this war, but now that it is under attack, it will answer force with force. That argument is central to everything Iran is saying publicly right now. It wants the region and the wider world to see its missile and drone strikes not simply as acts of aggression, but as responses to an assault on its territory, military infrastructure, and civilians. Whether other governments accept that framing is another matter, but it explains the tone of the Iranian response: defiant, expansive, and very clearly designed to show endurance. At the same time, many of the most dramatic Iranian battlefield claims remain unverified. State-linked and sympathetic outlets have circulated figures about dozens of strategic targets hit, hundreds of military-linked sites struck, and very large numbers of drones and ballistic missiles launched. Some of those claims have echoed widely online, but responsible reporting still separates what has been independently confirmed from what has merely been announced by one side. What is confirmed is serious enough. Central Israel has been hit, people have been killed, buildings have been damaged, and the fighting is spreading across the region. What is not confirmed should be treated carefully, because in modern war, propaganda travels almost as fast as missiles do. And the regional dimension may be the most dangerous part of all. Reuters reported that Iran's strikes have extended beyond Israel, with attacks and attempted strikes involving Gulf states, including places that host American military assets. Analysts told Reuters that instead of pressuring Gulf governments to distance themselves from Washington, Tehran's actions may actually be pushing them closer into coordinated defense arrangements with the US and possibly Western allies. That means every new missile launch risks doing more than causing immediate destruction. It risks redrawing alliances under wartime conditions. Once bases, ports, oil infrastructure, and shipping routes enter the picture, the war is no longer just a bilateral confrontation. It becomes a full regional crisis with global economic consequences. That is why the images from Tel Aviv matter beyond Israel itself. A missile landing in a city is not just a local tragedy. It is a signal to every capital in the region that the threshold has shifted. Governments that once thought they could stay on the edge of the crisis are now being forced to think about air defenses, energy routes, civil protection, and military readiness. Ordinary people in Gulf states, in Lebanon, in Jordan, and elsewhere are watching the same videos and asking the same question. If this can happen there, how long before it happens here? And because modern communication turns every impact into a global image within minutes, the psychological effect spreads even faster than the physical damage. Fear becomes regional before the missiles do. There is also a deeper moral argument running through all of this. Iran is accusing the US and Israel of violating international law and attacking civilian sites, while Israel points to missile strikes on civilian neighborhoods as proof that Iran is deliberately endangering non-combatants. The United Nations Human Rights Office has called for an investigation into a deadly strike on a girls' school in southern Iran, which shows just how quickly this war is producing incidents with potentially grave legal and humanitarian implications. Once schools, hospitals, shelters, apartment blocks, and places of worship enter the chain of destruction, the war becomes not only a military crisis, but a test of whether international law still has any meaning in practice. But for civilians, all of that language, law, legitimacy, deterrence, retaliation, can feel painfully distant. A family taking cover in Tel Aviv is not thinking about the UN Charter. A rescue worker pulling someone from rubble is not debating strategic doctrine. A mother trying to calm a child in a shelter is not interested in what a foreign ministry spokesperson says at a podium. War is always discussed by leaders in the language of necessity. It is experienced by civilians in the language of fear. That gap is where the real tragedy lives. It is in the ordinary routines destroyed by extraordinary decisions made far above the heads of the people who must survive them. And still, the most chilling part of this story may be what comes next. Because once missiles have struck major urban areas, once casualties are climbing, and once each side believes it must prove resolve, every new attack creates pressure for another. Governments do not want to look weak. Militaries want to restore deterrence. Public anger hardens. Funeral processions turn into political statements. Images of damage become fuel for the next wave of retaliation. This is how conflicts stop behaving like limited exchanges and start behaving like systems with their own momentum. Even leaders who say they want to avoid a wider war can end up moving deeper into one because every step backward begins to look, at home, like surrender. So when you look at Tel Aviv tonight, do not just see a city under fire. See a warning. See the fragility of assumptions that once seemed solid. See what happens when air defenses work well enough to prevent total disaster, but not well enough to prevent trauma. See what happens when a regional showdown moves from threats and covert actions into direct strikes on visible populated spaces. And see the terrifying truth that both sides may now believe they can still go further. That is the point at which wars become hardest to contain. Not when the first missile flies, but when everyone involved convinces themselves that they can absorb the next one. Tonight's story, then, is not just about sirens or smoke or shattered buildings in central Israel. It is about a region standing at a threshold. The strikes on Tel Aviv are real. The deaths are real. The widening battlefield is real. The fear is real. And the next question is the one no leader can answer with certainty. Was this the worst of it, or only the beginning? Because if the answer is that this was only a preview, then the world is not watching a single night of violence. It is watching the opening chapter of a much larger and far more dangerous war.